What's up YouTube, and welcome to another draw along with me, where today we're going to go ahead and paint this waterfall scene. Now I don't want you to stress over the details too much in this one. We're going to have some nice fun, creating some very loose painting aesthetic to create this beautiful waterfall scene. Now the palette for today's design is available on my Patreon. It's completely free to go ahead and grab that. I'll leave a link to the post in the description down below where you can go ahead and grab the palette for today's design, as well as the stencil guide, and everything else is built into Procreate. Now, with your canvas size for today's design, mine is 2000 by 2000, you are going to need to go ahead and create a canvas that gives you at least 50 layers. I've used 49 in mine, and I have tried to be considerate of layers throughout the whole of it, so you should be able to save a good deal as you make your way through the process, but I've used 50 without compressing all of my layers. So make sure you give yourself enough of a canvas size and layers so you can participate in today's design. Enjoy the process. It's a little bit of a longer tutorial, but hopefully you enjoy the process and create a wonderful design when you're done. As always, when you are done, make sure to tag me in your finished creations over on Instagram and come and join my Discord. It's completely free to join. And if you want even more tutorials from me, you can come and join me over on Patreon, where I've been posting exclusive tutorials every single month to my Patreon supporters, and the catalogue sits at nearly 100 exclusive tutorials. So if you want to support me in the work that I do here, you can come and join me over on Patreon. And with all that said, thank you so much for watching. Enjoy today's tutorial, and let's get started. So to get started, you will see that on my screen, I've got the stencil guide on here. And what I've done is I've downloaded it as a PNG, which you'll need to do as well. And if you go up to your actions and go to the option of add and insert a photo, you'll be able to insert the PNG into your layers. And I've just renamed it guide. And all I've done is drop the percentage down to around about 50%, just so we can lay out our designs. Most of this work doesn't depend necessarily on the layout. It's the work in terms of the details and the textures here and there with the sort of painting brushes. So what we're going to do is the first sort of stage of this tutorial is going to be laying out all the different sort of objects for our design, and then we'll try and make our way from sort of either back to front and flatten our layers as we go. So I will try and do my best to save you some layers as we go. So opening up our layers, we're going to go ahead and change our background color first of all. We're going to go ahead and we're going to grab this color here in the bottom right of the palette. Going to hit done. Going to create a new layer. I'm going to drag it underneath our guide, and I'm going to go ahead and create another one and swipe from left to right on both and group them together. And for the moment, we'll just rename this and we'll call it background. So we'll go down, show our keyboard, and we'll go to background. Now in here, we're then going to go ahead and grab the very bottom layer out of that group and go to our colors and grab the middle color in the far right column. Your brush wants to be set to airbrushing and the soft brush. And you can set your brush size to something fairly large, maybe around about 25%. And again, we're only really looking just quickly in this area here, because that is our sky. Everything sort of below that is not really anything we're concerned about. So we can set our brush size to something sort of quite large, maybe around about sort of 25%, and just blend across from that right side a little bit of a diagonal line, just to leave a little bit of this dark color up in this top right corner here. And then we'll go ahead and I will create a second layer. Well, in fact, we'll use the other one in here, sorry. We'll go to our colors and we'll grab the top color in the far right column, and we'll introduce a little bit of this brighter tone towards the bottom and a little bit over towards that right hand side. So you should have a nice sort of blend between all of those, so dark all the way through to that lighter tone over here on the right hand side. And while we're here, we're going to go ahead and go to our layers. We'll create a new layer and we'll change the blend mode from normal. We'll change it to the option of lighter color. We'll keep the same color, but we're going to go to our brush and we're going to use for the first time the painting brush of turpentine. I'm going to keep the opacity about 78%. Size wise, I think we could probably get away with either the 8% or otherwise the 15. Let's try the 15 to start with. And all I want to do is just streak some lines across our sky, really light with your pressure. You can build in some sort of brighter areas if you want to, like up here in the top left, and just streak them across. Just streaking them across, create again some brighter streaks in there if you like, and bring them down in towards this little corner. You will sort of lose them a little bit as they make their way down and into here. And if you want to, just give it a couple of goes. I've dropped that brush size down to around about 8% now, just so I can just introduce a bit more of a streak up there, and maybe some purposeful ones here and there where I can just add in a little bit of extra detail, but I'm leaving the darkness up there in the top left. And what you can also do is, if you want to, you can go ahead and grab your brush. You could tap on your eraser for a moment, tap on your eraser and go to airbrushing and the soft brush. You could set this to around about sort of 8 to 10% and just lightly just blend out in the top left. So leaving them a little bit brighter down here, and you could just sort of blend them out a little bit, creating a bit of a gradient. Again, don't worry about all the excess if it runs in behind your mountains. And we're also going to have our beaming sun up here as well in the top right. So a very simple way of creating some sky aesthetic. Now, I want you to make the decision as you go. You can pinch your layers together here. You could tap on the group for background and flatten it and save some layers. It's totally up to you. I'm not going to be in a situation where I'm going to need to, but if you do, we're somewhat done with the sky. So you can now tap on that and flatten it down into one layer. Let's then go ahead and create all the other layers for our sort of design. So we're going to go ahead and create a new layer. I'm going to create another new layer and swipe from left to right and group them together. And we're just going to rename this group and we'll just call it Rolling Hills. Essentially, a lot of the time when I do this, it's just where we're creating content that just makes its way towards the back of the design. Now I'm going to start at the top layer first of all in this group. We're going to go to our colors. We're going to go ahead and grab this color here, the top of the 5th column from the right, or top of the 6th column, either way. Top of the column there. Now I'm going to go to my brush. I am going to go to the option of calligraphy and the monoline brush. And if I tap on the brush, I've gone to the stabilization and I've brought it right down. I brought the streamline down to about 50% and the stabilization all the way down to, you could even drop them down a bit more if you wanted to. What I'm looking for is I just want those natural tremors in your hand so you can create some lovely bumps and lumps in there. So you could really drop it down and have as many as you like in there. So I'll just go with this for a minute, 30 and 4, and hit done. And the brush size, I'll put it at 5%. It doesn't really matter. We just want something nice and small. Now taking a look at our guide, with this particular color, we're going to come in from the side over here. It doesn't matter because this isn't visible. And we're aiming to do this little line down here that's going to run towards the bottom. Now it's actually going to be a blend of 2 lines here on our guide. So I'm going to go up into this point here. I'm going to create a lovely sharp point, and then I'm going to come along this line here. And I'm just going to sort of on the fly make a change and just run that down into there. So that's kind of your guide used, and we can then drag that over to the far right hand side, all the way over to the right, and drag and drop the colouring to fill that space. And then we're just going to make our way backwards quickly. So we're going to tap on the layer below. We'll go ahead and create a new layer. We'll go to our colours. We'll go ahead and we'll grab this colour here, the bottom of the 2nd column from the right. We're going to zoom in on our little stencil guide. Now we do need to remember to come all the way in from the outside of our canvas. So we're going to draw as we speak right now into here until you see your first little bit of your line appear in here. And then we're just going to sort of follow the guide down, and you can create as much detail as you like in here. You know, all these little bumps and lumps, something like this. And then you can just let that sort of run down into the valley down here. And then it just disappears. So once you get to here, we can zoom out even more. And we can go from that last point all the way off to the right. So you've filled in a line side to side, and you can drag and drop the colouring. Let's go again. Tap on the bottom layer, create a new layer, go to your colours, grab the middle colour in the 2nd column from the right, and we create another set of hills. Now this one's a little bit higher, it's up here. So I'm going to go ahead and draw in. You can see me drawing in as we speak. And we're going to create that top set here. Let that run in behind. I'm still drawing. And we're just going to try and follow the guide all the way down into where the sort of valley of the water will be at the bottom down here. And again, go from your last point all the way off to the right and drag and drop your colour in. And you can see I'm not perfectly sticking to my original stencil. It's not critical. And then we're going to go ahead and tap on the bottom layer in this group. We'll go to our colours and we'll grab the top colour in the 2nd column from the right. And zooming in, we've got this tiny little bit left to do here. So we're going to go all the way from the left hand side all the way in. And I'm going to just run that along here and along, and then all the way off to the right. Again, drag and drop your colour into that space. Let's then continue adding in all of the main shapes. So we've got our rolling hills. We're going to keep that in its nice little tidy group like so. We're going to go ahead and we're going to create 2 new layers and swipe from left to right on both. Group them together. And we're going to go ahead, first of all, rename this. Let's call it Waterfall. And once we've done that, we're going to go ahead and tap on the bottom layer out of the 2. We're going to go to our colours. We're going to go ahead and we're going to grab the top colour here in the 3rd column from the right. Same brush as before. We're going to draw in this hill here as well. So this one we're going to start at the very top here. We can create again all those little lovely tremors and points and all these little sort of variations to the lands. They can be really sort of detailed and very minor little areas of detail, and let that run all the way down. And you can run that off to the left hand side if you want, and then drag and drop your colour into that space here. And we've also then going to go ahead and block in our water area, our actual waterfall. So we're going to go up a layer to the empty one. We're going to go to our colours. We're going to go ahead and grab this colour here, the top of the 4th column. And we're going to go and look for the line that runs essentially down here and over that side over here. So we're going to start over here. It doesn't really matter until you get into view around about now, and you can then create the flat plane in the middle and then raise that up on the sides and let that run all the way off to the right hand side and drag and drop your colouring. So you end up with that flat area in the middle where we can let the water just spill in, and then you've got these sort of raised sides either side to show the divot in the land there. We're going to go ahead though, we're just going to tap on that layer for a moment, just bring the opacity down of it so we can bring it down to about 30%, so that way we can just see the rest of our layers. And we're going to go ahead and create the land that's just going to sit just in front of the waterfall. So we'll create 2 new layers again, left to right on both, group them together and rename. And we'll call these, let's go foreground. And we'll call it 1 because we're going to have 3 eventually. So we'll call it foreground 1. We're going to go to the bottom layer out of the 2. We're going to go to our colors. We're going to again make sure it's the top of the 4th column here. Top of the 4th column, and we're looking to introduce this line here. You might just about be able to see on camera that line there, and this one here that makes its way down here as well. So they're just going to nicely sort of frame our waterfall. So you can start at the bottom and you can create some really lovely details. I think the slower you make this, the better, because you'll create some additional sort of tremor lines in here and create little ledges as well. Don't be afraid to even come down on yourself if you want to. Come down here and then go back up again and go all the way up to the top. Create something interesting and then drag that off to the right hand side and drag and drop the color into that space. Move across to the opposite side and we'll repeat. This one goes all the way up to the very top of our design. So let's do the same. Let's try and mimic the kind of opposite side and the styling of that sharp point in here. And then I'll bring that down in quite a sort of vertical fashion and then start to think about how can I just let that run down, and it's going to run down into mist anyway, so you're going to lose a little bit of this later on. Now you can see I've just run into this little space here of our guide. I'm going to drag it off to the left, making sure I link that up and drag and drop the color in. So then we've created again the extra levels of the land. Then we're going to go ahead and create 2 new layers again, left to right, group them together and tap on the bottom one out of the 2 for a moment. And we're going to go ahead and go to our colors. We're going to grab the top of the 2nd column there. And we're going to zoom in and we're just going to create this area of land here. So I imagine that there's like a big brick sort of block here even, and then we're going to have a space for our tree. And then you can create some variation on the land here and let that just run all the way down into our water. Here, I'm going to bring in a little bit of a flat line and then I'm going to let that sort of really stick out on its own a little bit. I want to create like a boulder shape and then just link that up on the end and drag and drop your color in. So let's do that again. Let's drag and drop the color in. Just making sure that the land's not too boring. We've got a little bit of something else going on there. And then we're going to go ahead and we'll create one more new group. Let's rename that last one though. Let's go ahead and call that Foreground 2. Foreground 2. And we'll create 2 new layers again, left to right on both. Group them together. Rename that group again as well and call it Foreground 3. And the bottom layer out of the 2. We'll go to our colors. We'll grab the top left color in the palette and we'll just create this area of land here. It's right in front of us, so if you can give it a little bit more character and a little bit of extra sort of tremor and bumps and lumps and less sort of boring and quite sort of interesting to look at in a sense, drag and drop the color in and then you've created your final sort of level of your land. Now we've got a couple of things we just need to sort of fix in there. If we go back into our layers, we go down into our waterfall where we create this big block of color. You dropped it down to 30% with me. We're going to drag it back up to max and we'll turn on this layer as well here. So at the minute, your land and whatnot should look like this. We do have another group to make though. We just need to sort of encapsulate the water area. So we're going to go in front of our Foreground 1 group. So tap on Foreground 1, collapse the other groups down as well if it's easier just to take a look at all your layers. So tap on Foreground 1, create 2 new layers, left to right on both, group, and let's rename this and we'll call it Water. And if we go to the bottom layout, the 2, go to your colors. We're going to go ahead and we're going to grab this color here in the bottom left of the palette. We're going to go to our selection tool. We're going to go to color fill and turn it on so it's blue, and we're using the rectangle option. And one thing you may need to do is if you go to your guide, tap on it and invert it so it's now white, and then go back to that bottom layer in the water group. That way you should be able to see just this horizon line here, and we can just hopefully go ahead and go back to our selection tool. Again, rectangle, color fill turned on, And it doesn't matter if it's just a fraction higher, you can drag out your water like so and tap on your selection tool when you're done. Make sure we go back up to our guide though, we tap on it and we invert it again back to black. So at this point, if we collapse our water group down, we are done with our sort of setup of our design. Now we can go ahead and start to detail it. Now I am going to start at the back, make my way forward so that we can compress a few of those rolling hills as we go before we start to make our way into these larger areas. And for the rolling hills at the back, we are going to introduce a nice sort of blurring from back to front as we make our way forward. Now there's a couple of details we just need to add to each layer before we compress it and flatten it down. Let's open up our rolling hills. We have the one at the very back. Let's go ahead first of all and create a new layer. Again, don't worry, we are going to compress them in a moment. So tap on this layer, clipping mask it to the very back hill. Go to your colors. We'll go ahead and we'll grab the same color. So the top here of the second column from the right. Your brush, your layer, should I say. If we go back to the layer, we're going to change it to the option of add, and we'll just go ahead and leave it at max for a minute, just so you can see every detail you draw. If we go back to our brush, we go to painting and we go to turpentine. We're going to go ahead and set the opacity at 78%. And because it's so far back, I think we'll go for 3% on the brush size and we'll zoom in. Now, our sun's going to be here. So you've got to remember where the angle of the sun is and where it comes across. Let's turn off our guide at the top. I don't really need that on at the minute. I can see my hills here. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to just very, very sort of faintly sort of draw in some simple highlights on some of these back hills just to give them a bit more character. Now, right now, that color is temporary. So don't take a look at it and think, what are we doing, Joe? It's completely temporary at the minute. It's just so we can see it. And that's all we should really need to do. I don't think we need to introduce anything in this area here. Then what we need to do then is go to our layer and find a percentage that we really like that's not going to be too detailed or too contrasty. It's quite far back, we're going to lose a lot of the detail. So let's bring it down to something maybe around about, let's go for about 25% there. We're then going to go ahead and create one more new layer, tap on it and clipping mask it. We'll go to our color. We'll go ahead and we're going to grab a nice misty color, which is going to be this one here. It's going to be the middle of the fourth column from the right. And your brush wants to be airbrushing and the soft brush. Maximum opacity, and the brush size can be nice and small, probably around about 4%. And all I want you to do is just very, very lightly at the bottom here, just very lightly create a bit of a light glow from the bottom. And that should just about be everything you need to add here. A very simple amount of color, nothing too sort of intense, and maybe a tiny bit dragged up there on the left. Then what we're going to do is we're going to say we're done with that. We're going to pinch all three of these layers together into one. And then we're going to go to our adjustments, Gaussian blur, swipe from left to right, and we're going to add in a 6% Gaussian blur. Look, obviously we lost all of that detail other than the blur at the bottom. And that is why I didn't want you to add in too much. There's a very, very subtle amount of detail. Now, if you're looking at yours now and think, I've lost it completely, undo that, undo it again, and undo the merged layers at the top, and go back and grab your opacity and maybe bring that up again. Maybe bring it up to say 40%. And repeat, just pinch those three together. Go back to your adjustments and Gaussian blur and swipe from left to right and get that 6% Gaussian blur. It's very subtle. You're still going to lose a lot of it anyway, and I want you to because it's in the distance. We're not too interested in it. So we've gone up to 6%. We're going to tap on our adjustments when we're done. And we need to repeat that for this layer and this layer as well. So there's a very subtle amount of detail there. We're going to go up to the next hill. We're going to go ahead and create a new layer in front of it, tap on it and clipping mask it. Change the blend mode again from normal to add. Grab the same color. So we're going to grab the middle of the second column. We're going to go back to our brush and go back to painting and turpentine. 3% brush size should be okay, and the 78% again opacity. And we're looking to add in some highlights down here. So again, we're looking at that right side of a lot of these areas here. And can you just sort of wiggle your pen in there and create some scribbly details of where some rocks just capturing the light down this edge, and can you create some on this big nice peak here? Now your peaks may look slightly different, but that's fine. You're just looking to add in some color to that right edge and keep it simple. Zoom out, don't get lost in it too much. Remember how far away it is and how zoomed in we are. You don't need to add in too much on here. You could even reduce the brush size down to 1% if you really want to get quite granular and add in purposeful details in here. You could even introduce like another little peak here of sort, like another one there. Just something to add a little bit more character. Again, what we're going to do is once you've added in a simple amount like this, we're going to go to the layer. We can tap on it. We can bring the opacity down to something we're happy with that still gives us a little bit of that detail. So the last one I think was about 40%. Let's go to 50% because it's a little bit closer. We'll create a new layer, tap on it and clipping mask it. We'll go to our colors and grab that misty color here, the middle of the fourth column from the right. Again, your brush wants to be set to airbrushing and the soft brush. We'll set that brush size to a little bit larger now, about 6%. And just down here, again, we're imagining the waters coming round and then down our little waterfall here. I just want to add in a light little bit of color just down here, just literally a tiny, tiny bit in this area down here. And then once we've done that, we can then go ahead and go back to the layers, pinch all three together, go up to your adjustments, Gaussian blur. Now the last one we did was 6%. Now if we swipe from left to right, we only want to add in 4%. It's a little bit closer. Again, zoom out. You should then still be able to get a little bit of that silhouette of your highlights. Now, don't forget, like I have, if you undo that and undo your merging of layers, we've just got to go back to that layer here for the add and all the detail. I'm going to grab the same color again, the middle of that second column from the right, and change my brush back to painting because I've got this peak up here. So I'm just going to go back in quickly and just add in some very simple details. I might even add in a little bit back here. And just guiding lines all the way down that hillside, keeping it again somewhat simple. So again, we're then going to go ahead and pinch those layers together, adjustments, Gaussian blur, swipe from left to right and add in that 4% Gaussian blur there and tap on your adjustments when you're done. Now we'll go forward again, tap on this layer here for the rolling hills, create a new layer in front of it, tap on it, clipping mask it. We'll go to our colors. We'll grab the bottom of the second column from the right. Your brush wants to be painting and turpentine. And if we go back to the layer, we just want to change the blend mode from normal to the option of add. We're probably going to need to somewhat think 3 or 8% here to add in some detail on here because it's getting a little bit closer to us now. So just see what sizes fit you best. Potentially, you may just want to keep it simple. So you could probably even go for a 5 maybe in the middle. It's not critical. As long as you've got a brush size that you're happy with to add in some detail on here and some brighter edges. I'm going to bring that down to around about the 3% mark again. I'm just going to see if I can add in some additional sort of areas of coverage here just because it's looking a little bit slim for me. I'm just going to see if we can add in a little bit running down there. Fairly simple. On the back here, we'll just add in a little bit of lighting on there too. Again, this color is only temporary. Take a look at what you've achieved. Again, this is background content. We're not too stressed about it really. So let's go ahead and just see what else we could maybe add in. If nothing, then that's fine. Now, another thing you can do when it gets a little bit closer to you, you can then go up to your smudge tool, tap on your smudge tool and use painting in the turpentine. I've got it set to maximum opacity and the size can be nice and small, maybe around about 2 or 3%. And you can just smudge out some of these lines here and push them around a little bit and just create some softer sort of areas of coverage. And potentially you may end up with a nicer little effect and you can push them backwards across sort of the peaks of the hill here. It's like a little softer aesthetic to it and push it around a bit. You may end up with some really nice texture. Again, texture is what's going to really make this sort of stand out. We're just trying to give the impression of that there's a nice rocky surface there. Something somewhat simple. Now for me, I've probably added in a little bit too much. So I'm going to go to my eraser this time. Tap on my eraser and use something again like painting in turpentine. Maximum opacity, but probably a 3% brush size. And let's go ahead and let's in fact go smaller than that. And we're just going to hack away into that. See what we can take away. You know, less I really do believe is more. And I know that saying is quite common in art and it's quite a thing to get your head around and whatnot, but our base color is our shadows. Again, when we zoom all the way out, our base color is our shadows. So when we're erasing from here, all we're doing is just reintroducing some shadows. So by doing that, you're adding in more detail, you're adding in more contrast. I'm going to delete some color from behind this peak here, because again, that sun's coming across. Let's get rid of some of that there. I'll get rid of some of that in here. And I'm just running the pen over the top, just trying to create these sort of rocky textures. And the turpentine, if I zoom in for you, you can see how sort of pixelated it gets. And you can really take away some details here and there. And definitely on the back end over here, I'll just sort of run a line through. Don't be afraid to hack right through it. I call it hacking. There's probably a better word for it, but it's reintroducing some sort of negative space in here. So you can just hack away at it, chop away, and just take away some details. So you get left with something like this. Now again, we need to just repeat one more step. We need to create a new layer, tap on that layer and clipping mask it. We're going to go back to our color and grab that misty color at the middle of the fourth column from the right. Your brush wants to be set back to airbrushing and the soft brush. Now I'm going to bring the size this time down to about 4%. I'm just going to introduce that brighter tone just down here where the water is just creating a nice sort of big area of mist, and it almost creates a bit of like a lake almost, making its way through here, which I think looks really cool. And then you can maybe just introduce the tiniest little bit of just higher sort of spray maybe up here, just a tiny bit. And if we go back to our layers, we're going to go back to the add layer. We're going to see what percentage we like the look of. I'm going to probably make this one around about 70% this time. It's a little bit closer to us. We can keep some of those details. And just like before, we'll pinch those together. We'll go back to our adjustments, Gaussian blur. We'll swipe from left to right, except this time we've been reducing it by 2 every single time. So now we're just going to drop that down to a 2% and tap on our adjustments when we're done. Again, zoom out and look at how your hills now just continue to make their way backwards. They've all got a little bit of detail on there, just something just to give it some extra character. We're then going to go ahead and we're going to move forward to this one here. And this one's going to get some very sort of subtle lighting, almost as if it's in the shadows. So we'll create a new layer, we'll tap on it and clipping mask it to it temporarily. We'll go to our colors. And we used this column of colors here. So we're going to grab the middle color in the second column, the third column from the right. Your brush wants to be set to painting and the turpentine. We're going to use that, of course, throughout, 78% still. We're going to set the brush size. I think we need something in the middle, like a 5% brush size. So I'm just going to drop that into the middle here. I'm going to take a look. Now, I really want to be sparing with this, and the color is extremely subtle. All we're doing here at this particular stage is showing kind of the rolling of the stone, making its way down towards the river and therefore the waterfall as well. So you're keeping it really subtle, just introducing paint streaks to show flow and movement of land and how the land is sort of descending down and into the water. Now, I've dropped the brush size down to a little smaller 3% there, just to add in some smaller details, and you can see that the color is very, very subtle, nothing too strong, and we're just adding it more to the right side still, kind of like how we did our highlights, but this area is not going to get quite as bright compared. Now, I do want to add some highlights to this. I don't want to leave it too sort of naked, so we're going to go ahead and we'll create a new layer again. We'll change the blend mode of that new layer to add, and we will tap on it and we will clipping mask it. Now we're going to do an effect that I really like. We're going to go ahead and first of all, let's set the, let's go to our brush size, probably in that 5% range. And we're going to add some just to the top up here. In fact, I'm going to go small. I'm going to go down to 3. I'm quite comfortable with the 3 mark. I'm going to add in some brighter highlight along this top edge and create some grooves here and there, just at the very tip up here. I'm going to bring that down through this area here. And then I'm going to pretty much leave it like that, just with a tiny amount of sort of highlight. But then we'll go to our eraser. We'll tap on our eraser and use airbrushing and the soft brush. If we set the brush size to about sort of maybe 4 or 5%, I'm just going to blend that out now. So just blending it out to create like a bit of a sharper, brighter point at the top, where that is getting a little bit of highlight, but it's very subtle. And this area here, again, is not our main focus. We don't want people looking at the back of our design. We want them looking at the front. Now, just like we did before, we'll go ahead though and we'll create a new layer. We'll tap on it and clipping mask it. We'll go to our colors, grab the hazy sort of misty color, the middle of the fourth column from the right, and go back to your brush, airbrushing and the soft brush. And we'll set that brush size to about 3%. And just in here, I'm going to lightly dance this pen in here, creating a misty look, trying to almost lose that line almost of the land in there. And just it running down looks okay. That looks like it runs down into the water. That's pretty cool with me. And that's it. We can then go ahead and pinch those layers together. Make sure you're happy with it, of course, but pinch those together and you should be able to then save yourself some of your layers. Now, again, I always want to help you guys out. If you want to at this point, you could tap on your rolling hills, tap on the group and flatten it down into 1 layer. So you save yourself 3. But I'm going to collapse the group down. I'm going to leave it as it is. You may want to make some adjustments later on potentially, but other than that, we can move on. Now, taking a look, what have we got next in our waterfall group? We've got the land on the right hand side, so it's this area here. So we're going to go ahead, we'll create a new layer, we'll tap on it and we'll clipping mask it to it. And this one is also going to get some very subtle colors. So we're going to go ahead and go to our colors. We're going to grab the middle of the third column from the right, and our brush wants to be set again back to painting and turpentine. Same settings as before, we're not adjusting those at all. We're going to go ahead and we're going to, with the 3% brush size, we're going to bring the land down and gradually down. Now I always look for my peaks, and I'm just going to run the land. And because we've not got any highlights to add over here, we're just going to simply just continue adding it almost to the left hand side of those peaks, running it all the way down into our water. We're showing that graduation again, the land descending towards the water again. Now I was just deliberating then between a bigger brush size, so I'm going to go up to the 5% there in the middle. I'm going to make that in the middle if it lets me. You can drag out to the right and you can hold there. And we're going to go ahead and drag down. And all I want you to do is here, when we're starting to get into larger areas, squiggle your pen. Just squiggle your pen. Create some lines down here. As long as you're descending down towards the water, create some squiggly lines. You can create some beautiful swooping lines like this, where the land's a bit smoother. It doesn't have any jitters to it. And then you can run some lines here, making their way down towards, and you can bring the ones here at the front. So this area over here is technically at the front. You can bring them over the front of them. You can like literally bring that down like here. That pushes things backwards. I'm not going to keep that, but that's just a concept that you could bear in mind. And let's bring some up from behind this land here. So bringing in some bumps and lumps, and then you can get really straight and vertical. So it's quite flat and then it shoots all the way up. Now I'm going to go back to 3%. I'm going to kind of show how we can maybe bring in some land here just from the top, keeping it simple and somewhat messy. I want you to have that messy aesthetic to it. We don't need to have crispy super details absolutely everywhere. Zoom out, you get the impression for the land and how it's descending again down towards that water's edge. You can get back in there though and create as many or as little as you like. Less will be more, and we can always go back to our eraser and chop away, hack into them. Create little larger bumps. And again, don't forget we're at 78%. So if you want to, you can find like a little ledge that you want to just bring out the details of a tiny bit more and just go over it a couple of times, because you're layering the brush on and then you'll be layering on a good solid 100% brush size, brush opacity. And I've just brought the brush size down, that's why I got confused. Brought that down to about a 1% here, just to add in a tiny little something back here. Just a little extra bit of detail. And as I mentioned, you can always go back to your eraser, tap on your eraser, go to painting and the turpentine. Bring the brush opacity down to 70% if that's what you wish. And with that, you can chop away through here, but you're not getting rid of absolutely everything. So if I bring that down to a 2% now, I can break into some of these lines, create more of a uneven surface of the land. I can even sharpen up some of these edges here by going over the top and getting rid of some of these like painting streaks. So what I mean by that is I'm going over the top edge of these sort of streak lines that I can see. I'm just sort of sharpening them up, but run them through. I had somebody message me on Instagram about this, about, you know, how can they improve particular rock aesthetics, and less is more. Less really is more. Every gap again you leave is your shadows. Every gap you leave is a shadow. So with that in mind, we want that contrast. We want that beautiful variation in the land. So we can hack away. And I'm now just separating this area here, this flat plane, and I'm going to chop away into it a tiny bit, creating those streaks again downwards, but just chopping away into it a little bit more. Seeing what I can get away with. Taking out little areas here, seeing what I can just take away from like a big solid area of color here. Can I bring in like a little V cut here and then chop sort of straight through there? Could I even create like a bit more of a vertical line coming down? And then that really breaks that up over there on the right. You've got sort of all of these interchanging sort of movement in the rock there. Now you could spend a ton of time on there, and I urge you to do so. If you have the time, please do so. I think I'm going to leave that as it is, because that looks pretty much as I expect it to look for now. So we'll move on from that area. Again, if you want to, you can pinch those together. I'm going to keep them separate just in case I want to make an adjustment later on. Now we're going to just leave our waterfall for a moment. I want to come back to it because it's going to be a big part of our design, but slightly later on. So I'm actually going to go ahead and turn it off for a moment completely. So just check that box. We're going to move up into our foreground one group and we'll collapse our waterfall down. We will tap on this clipped layer here. We'll tap on it, should I say, and clip it to our areas of our stone. Now we're here and here. So we can now go ahead and add in some of that lighting as well as it makes its way across. This side's going to be a little bit more muted. It's in the shadows. This side over here is going to be a little bit sort of brighter because it's going to end up with some nice tones coming from our sun. So we're going to go ahead first of all. I'm going to grab the middle color here in the fourth column. Your brush is still going to be turpentine, but I need just go ahead and sort of make it a little bit larger, about 8%. And what I want you to do is I want you to really kind of just throw some color in. So don't look at it too much. We're just going to bring in some large chunks of color down here, and we're going to chuck in some area here, chuck on some color. Now it's very, very subtle. You might just about be able to see that pop up on camera. I'm taking a look myself at my viewfinder just to triple check. You can see it, but I'm chucking it in on the right side and creating grooves, etc. in here. But because we've got brighter tones to add in, we can go ahead and sort of build on top of this for now. So I can see that kind of very minimal sort of texture running through there. I'm going to move over to the opposite side and do the same. The left edge this time though. So we're going to come down here and add in some of these streaks. Now, I'll stay with the brush. In fact, I'll stay with the brush size. And I'll just try and create some streaks, making their way down again towards that water. Blocking it in, chucking in the colour. Be brave with it. We'll set that brush size now to about 5% instead and come down some edges like here. So you might just about be able to see sort of the change in how I've added some lighting on this left edge. I brought that all the way down and then it starts to sort of flatten out a little bit just before it makes its way in towards the water. I'm just going to sort of add in a bit more grey down there. Now these extra tones that you add in underneath sometimes can be really, really powerful because they set the blueprint for where you should then add in the rest of your highlights. So if we now go ahead and create another new layer, tap on it and clipping mask it, we're going to go up to our colors. Now we've got another tone here at the bottom of that fourth column. It's a slightly more punchy color. So we can then go ahead with the 5% brush size. We can go down some of those areas that we just created and we can maybe start to build on top of it and leave some areas that are a little bit gray. So you don't have to add it in absolutely everywhere, but now you should just about be able to see a little bit of extra build up of the color on top. And we want that painting aesthetic, so try not to sort of stress over it too much. And then a little bit more on that right side, like so, because that's where the lighting's coming from. So I can be a bit braver down here. I can get rid of a lot of those grays where I think I can maybe add in a bit more up here and definitely a good chunk up here at the very, very top of our design. Just add in a good surface that I can build some color on top of in a moment. Now over here on the right, I think we're pretty much done. I think the only thing you could add in is maybe a little bit of extra color up here at the top and maybe highlight a tiny bit here and here. I wouldn't go too much further down because this area here really is going to be quite muted. It's in the shadows. We want that minimal aesthetic to it. So now what we can do is we can create a new layer and focus on this left side. So we'll tap on it, create a new layer. We'll go to our colors and we've got this brighter gray color top of the fifth column now. And we can go ahead and zoom in over here and we can take a look again for your blueprint. So this is a sort of term I want you to kind of just sort of really soak in your blueprint of where you've laid out your darker mid-tones. And you can get in here now, take a look at where you've added those in and go, right, okay, I know exactly what I've got to do. I've got to add some color on top of those and maybe a little bit more towards the right-hand side, which in this particular case is where that sun is coming from. And I can just crisp up a few of these edges and be a bit brave. So let's undo that one there. It's probably a little bit too big of a brush size at that place. So I'm going to go back down to about 3%. And it's going to get in here now with a 3%. You don't have to add it absolutely everywhere. And bear in mind, of course, is that sun going to come over the top? So I'm going to undo that lower area here and focus more of this color towards this top area up here. And you can then start to maybe sort of get in here, maybe even with a sort of a 2 or 1% brush size and start to crisp up any sort of rugged sort of rough edges that you want to introduce to your stone. You know, create some additional little streaks in here, just extra little content in the shadows almost, and little bumps and lumps that will just nicely give you some extra detail in this area. So I'm just going over now, creating little sort of areas of stone, hopefully, that just make it look like they're joining together from a location somewhere else up out of the scene. And because we're kind of looking at the environment and thinking that there's a waterfall running through here and of course the lake towards the bottom, we maybe don't want to add in anything that's not running down in towards that point. So you want all your line work to run down in towards a point down here so that you can understand then how the land maybe has eroded certain things over time. And this was maybe full of water at one point and the flow of water, eroded it down into a point. You could factor in all these little considerations in your work. Now, I'm kind of happy with that for a moment. Again, we can always come back to it if we want to, but we're going to go ahead and create another new layer. This is going to be sort of our final kind of coloring on here. So tap on it and create a new layer, tap on it and clipping mask it, go to your colors, and we have a nice sun color here, the middle of the fifth column. Now, I want you to be really sparing with this, probably a 2 or 3% brush size, whatever you can kind of get away with. And you're going to add it again on top of those areas, a little bit more though, this time only to the right hand side, and streak in, scuff in some of this brighter tone. I really want you to sort of scuff it in, chuck it on top of some of those areas that you've already created, and just create very sort of tiny areas that are getting some light. And bear in mind, would this peak here get in the way? I think, yeah. So let's go ahead and, yes, we've got some brighter tone in behind that, but not the brightest sunlight. So let's leave a gap. And then does this maybe stick out just enough that I can scuff in some detail in here and add in some additional highlight, maybe a tiny bit back there too, just the odd little bit of stone that's just sticking out enough that we can go ahead and add in some little brighter tones. So again, that little blueprint that we spoke about earlier is really set sort of the location and where we're adding in all the stone. Now I'm going to leave it. We can come back to it, of course, if we want to. There is one addition you can make, which is optional, but I'm going to go underneath those bright highlights that we just created. I want to preserve those the most. I'm going to create a new layer. I'm going to go to my colors and I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to grab the top color here in the fourth column. So the base color. You can go back to your brush and you can go back into painting, but we can change it to the stucco brush. And you've got a couple of options. You can set it nice and small around about 13%, and you can just very lightly run it through here and look at the erosion that's happened here. Again, I know that's super subtle on camera. You'll be able to see it in your own work, but really lightly in certain areas, you can just run your pen over and darken up a few of these areas and create areas of stony texture. So I could really sort of run through there, break that down quite a considerable amount. And that's probably a bit too much for me. So I'll maybe just create a cut a little bit lower down and then a little bit more towards the top. A little bit maybe on the back end over here. It's just a very subtle brush that you could just add in a little bit of extra texture in here. And it's just a nice combination of brushes that I think look really nice together. So you can really dash them along. A light coat almost over the majority of it will look fantastic, but keep it to a minimum where you can. Now, we're going to go ahead and we're going to collapse that group down. They are somewhat done with for now in terms of adding in the details. So at this point, if you're happy with your details, tap on the group and flatten it. We're going to go ahead though, and we're going to move on to our waterfall. So we're going to bring back in the waterfall. So we're going to open up that group and tap on this layer here and turn it on. And now we've turned it back on, we can see these areas here on the side of where our land is. And now we can work out the area in the middle that just needs some detail without adding in detail in the wrong areas or too much in areas that we can't even see. So now we're going to go ahead and create a new layer, tap on it and clip it to the waterfall. I'm going to go to our colors. We're going to jump to this color here, the bottom of the fourth column. We're going to make sure our brush is set back to painting and turpentine. Same opacity, size is set to 5% for a moment. And the first thing I want you to do is in the middle here, just draw in some lines where your waterfall is going to be. So draw in some straight lines where you can. Some straight lines. You can even hold your pen down if you want to, just to create those nice straight lines. But just sort of mark in roughly where that's going to sit in the middle. Just draw that in, creating some streaks. Now what this is going to do is it's going to add in a little bit of colour just in behind our waterfall, which we can then build the water on top of. And now it's just a matter of building in that blueprint that we've spoken about before. So I'm going to go ahead and just sort of run in some land, like some very vertical rock. It makes its way down where this waterfall's just eroded into this area of stone and wall where over time it's just cut away and cut away. And you can create diagonal kind of lines that run across, have some fun. You may redo it a few times. Do not stick with something if you do not like it, really learn to sort of not take too much pride in it straight away, and understand that you can undo your work. You don't need to, you won't nail it first time. There are so many times where you only see my finished sort of cut here in the tutorials. There are times where I honestly just draw something like 3 or 4 times and it just does not seem to fit, and I'll just cut it out, and I urge you to, do the same. But at this point, again, we're just working on building that blueprint in. You can bring in some stone again from the opposite side. You can really bring that across if you want and connect those together. You're kind of creating all these kind of painting lines, and where are they pointing? That's the most important thing. And then from there, you can maybe create like little ledges down here, like more horizontal sort of flat areas. You can build up some color on the top edge. I can really sort of add in some good color here, as if there's a big stone up here and another bit up here maybe, and then leave a gap in behind where that shadow would fall. I'll leave a gap between those so they're disconnected a little bit. You can bring your brush size down to that 3% mark and create some much needed smaller areas of detail. And this is your main focal point, of course, for your design. So this is where you may need to just go ahead and just spend some additional time creating some rocky avenues for where your stone can just make its way down. Again, always abide though by potentially the concept that later on less will be more, and we can get back in with our eraser and cut away and leave just our base color, because again, our base color is our shadows. So we can always come back to it, hack away and leave those gaps. So, if you do sort of go over the top, in my opinion, add in too many, just go back. Let's go back. Create some flat ledges here and there where you can. There's some little flatter areas there where the stone has just got a nice flat surface to fall on. Nothing too repetitive, mind. You don't want to add in like 2 back to back, for example, or top to bottom. So I'm just looking to build in all these little avenues. I'm going to probably bring that brush size up to a large one for a moment, and 8%, and just add in some large areas of grey up here. Some large areas of grey, like big stones almost at the very top up here, as the land just rolls down into this little misty lake area here. Rolling those down and in, and they kind of look like roots almost at this point. Now again, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to do a couple of things. I'm going to tap on my smudge tool and use turpentine under painting. Let's bring that to 5%. Let's try and smudge out some of these. Let's get rid of some of those painting streaks almost. You may even introduce some additional streaks because you are using the painting brush. Let's bring that brush size down to about 2%. And I'm just going to try and smudge some of these. I'm just looking to kind of just blend out a few of the lines, pushing them again in that downward direction. And where I think sometimes we've got maybe too many painting lines, I'm just going to blend them together. I'm just pushing those ones backwards a little bit, like it's a bit of stone just sticking its head out, just enough that we can just pop some light on the top of it, and that's it. It then maybe just falls back into and recesses back into the stonework. So again, I'm looking for all of these little areas back here. I'm just trying to see, can I smudge them out? Can I feather them in a bit more? So although they're stones, they will have sort of smooth areas to them. Smoothing that in a little bit more. Seeing what we can come up with. I'll take a look at the opposite side again, smoothing. And at this point, I want you to take a look and go, okay, where can I potentially start to take away some areas? What areas am I not too happy with? What areas can I, go for that less is more approach and smooth out, but at the same time, erase in a moment. So I'm just going to push in and I'm going to give that a nice strong streak there. Do the same down here too. We've got some nice sort of pointed in detail. I always tend to sort of zoom out because you get the overall impression and the stonework potentially. And I'm going to go back to my eraser. Turpentine again, about 3 or 4%. Let's see if we can cut away into some of these. Break them down, get rid of a few of them, not be too proud of it necessarily. Get in there, hack away. It's not necessary, but again, I always do really feel that less is more here, especially when your base color is your shadows. And I keep saying it because it is something that just eventually just becomes like muscle memory, and you understand that if that's the best way that you like to work and your base color is, again, your shadows, life's so much easier if you just know the rules, because you know you don't have to, there's not another stage after this to then add in your shadows too. It's just simply adding in highlights only on a color that you're happy with to represent your shadows. So I'm just going to try and sort of create some little areas that maybe link up a little bit. So I've just sort of swooped a line here, and maybe I can go back to my smudge tool and maybe even merge them together a tiny bit more and kind of blend them into one area so that ledge goes across. The randomness of the erosion will look fantastic if you can pull it off. Now don't worry about it sort of too low down, because further down you are going to end up losing a little bit of that detail anyway, because we're going to end up with some mist and whatnot in there. So yes, you know, feel free to keep doing it anyway, maybe just for practice purposes, but ultimately you don't need to add in too much towards the bottom, it will get lost. So I'm going to build on top of this blueprint. We're going to do exactly the same kind of principles. I'm going to create a new layer. I'm going to tap on this layer and clipping mask it. I'm going to go to my colors. I'm going to go ahead and grab the top color in the 5th column. Just going to triple check that I clipped that. I did. So now I can go ahead with a 3% brush size. I think I can go in here and start to work out some of the areas I want to brighten up. Now this brush, now color anyway, it's going to start to look a little bit bright. So I would really urge you to maybe just do the top area of some of these surfaces and maybe keep it to a real minimum and a little bit higher in your design. Down here, again, based on the fact we're going to end up adding some mist in here as well, you're going to lose a little bit of it. So I'm just adding in a tiny bit now across some of these top surfaces, just to add in some little additional areas of contrast in the design. So these just extra bright spots will just help stand out a little bit. You can add in like little specks of it a little bit lower down. I just wouldn't add too much because it's going to be a little bit too bright down there otherwise. So a little bit more towards the top edge up here. And definitely on this area here, you know, I can make that brush size 5% now, or 8% should I say, and just add in some big areas of color where that light is coming through our little valley, and boom, straight onto the stonework there. I can add in some nice big color area there on that slab area. And a little bit back there too. So you can see now that lighting, as it's at the top, it creeps down a little bit, but not too far. We're then going to go ahead and go to our layers. We'll create another new layer. We'll tap on it and we'll clipping mask it. We'll go to our colors and we'll grab the middle color in the 5th column there. Same brush. We're just going to try and let's try and grab a 5% in there, potentially in that little gap. And then I'm looking for that lighting coming across. So I've got this big stone here and I've kept it nice and flat. I've not added in too much to it. So I can get away with adding in this lovely sort of glaze of color, and then another little bit back here too. And that's enough to show that that lighting is just resting on that area of stone. I can go ahead and probably set that down to about 3% now. And can I add in some additional highlight on this edge down here, like a little bit just in here, something very simple and subtle. And can I just also run a little bit of lighting along some of those areas here just before they start to really fall off into our little shadows back here. So I'm definitely going to try and add in some back there too. See if I can smudge that in a tiny bit, a little bit of a brighter spot. Can we add some on here too? Maybe there's just a tiny bit on the top surface of our little area of land here. Add in another flat plane, just adding in an additional level of color. Run a little bit of brighter highlight there and a little bit on the top too, like so. And just lovely little bright highlights. I think that's all we necessarily need to do on this particular stage. We don't want to add in too many here, but we're going to repeat some of the steps we've done. We'll go to our smudge tool, especially with our highlights here. Can you sort of soften them out a little bit? Can you hack away into them? Can you sort of blend them down a little bit? You know, wrapping over some of the areas here. So I'm going to try and wrap that one there. I'm going to try and push this one backwards over some of the rock a tiny bit more, and also smudging it, especially at the lower areas. If you've only added in like the tiny amounts, you should just get the tiniest little bit of residue of it, like a really subtle shadow, highlight, should I say. Zooming out, we've got some nice little details on there. Again, I think we could probably lower them down. So I'm actually going to tap on the layer and bring that opacity down. I'm going to bring that down to around about sort of 65%. And once we added in our water, potentially we may want to go ahead and reinvest some opacity in that just to bring it back up. For a minute though, we're going to move into our waterfall. So we're going to create a new layer. We're not going to clip it. We're going to go to our colors, and our waterfall is going to consist of these sort of tones just over here. So I'm going to start with the middle color in the 6th column there. Same brush as we were. We're going to go ahead. I'm going to keep it, I think 3% might be okay. In fact, let's go for the 8 to start with, and let's see if we can add it in. Now, I've just rotated my canvas. It's a little bit easier to do. I'm going to streak in some line work down. Now, We want to go all the way from the very top and push down and keep your sort of pressure, should I say, nice and kind of light. Don't want to add in too much too early, and you can also push up from the bottom, believe it or not, because where it sort of gets a little bit brighter here, maybe it's just hit a rock that's just on the surface of the wall behind, and then therefore it's just bursting outwards and it's creating a bit of a spray almost. So I'm building up the colour, taking a look at that. We've got this lovely little sort of stream in there, and towards the top I just want to go back in with a 3% now, and just over the top surface of this line here I'm just going to do dash over dash over dash, and just keep going. I'm going to leave a little bit of a gap on the sides where we can let the shadows just sort of take over a little bit. And I push in, and I can push this 3% down in some of the gaps where I think it's appropriate, but ultimately I'm just building up this kind of light grey at the very top here, where the water gets a lot of air in it, so then it just flows over and you end up with a nice white kind of look to it. And just building up that grey, taking a look at that, you can now get the real impression that there's maybe a surface of water in behind. So as it makes its way and trickles its way over, it again then starts to then change into its different colour. Let's then go ahead and create another new layer. Let's go to our colours. We're going to go ahead and grab the bottom colour in that 6th column. And we're going to kind of repeat the steps. We're going to start off with probably with a 5% brush size. So I'm going to try and drop it in that gap. And we're going to go ahead. I'm going to streak in some brighter spots here. Now, try and build on top of your more colourful areas that you built a second ago. So trying to just bring in some brighter streaks on top. The wonderful thing with the waterfall, especially if you sort of keep the colour a little bit brighter towards the top, you can really still create like a real good sense of lighting. So we can go ahead and just streak over the top here with a 5%, just bringing that water just over the top, just enough, and bring that down. Now, if you're concerned about your sort of waterfall at the very top anyway, here, and you can see that line from the land, what you can do is you could go ahead and go down to the land here, and you could go ahead and maybe grab something, say like the eraser, tap on the eraser and use something like airbrushing in the soft brush with a very low brush size, probably around about 2%, and you could just feather that line a little bit. So I'm just very lightly just feathering it out, and it should blend away just enough that you won't get that solid line anymore. Now, one thing I want you to try and do is, again, try and abide by just having sort of less is more in here. We don't want to add in too much here. You can add a really lovely bright spot though towards the top. You know, this top edge up here, if you bring that brush size down to 3%, making sure in our layers we go back to the top layer in the waterfall group where we've got all these whiter streaks. And you could just build on top of here. You can maybe even make that smaller, maybe about 2% now, and just build in a lovely bright line almost along here. I've left a big gap there. We don't want to make it too repetitive. You can get in there and add in some lovely, lovely detail. Lovely stuff. And then in here, don't be afraid to just add in like a little bit here and there. Again, where it's maybe hitting a rock in the background, it's totally up to you how much you add. I'm going to leave mine though at the very top. I'm quite happy with how that water falls. I've got another sort of spray area here, and it looks quite smart because we've got the brighter area towards the top. Now we're going to go ahead and we're going to move into some additional sort of misty lighting, etc. down here before we then maybe revisit our waterfall and take a look at some of the colors and can we adjust some of them. So I'm going to go ahead and we're going to, in our waterfall group, I'm going to create a new layer. I'm going to go to my colors. I'm going to go ahead and grab this color here. So these two here are our misty colors. So I'm going to grab the top color in the 4th column from the right. Your brush wants to be set to airbrushing and the soft brush. And we're going to set the brush size probably around about, let's go for a little bit larger than that, maybe about 10 or 12%. And we're going to very lightly go along here. Notice how we're going to also separate this area a little bit. I'm going to lightly just wobble my pen. I'm hopefully not going to make the camera sort of wobble too much. I'm going to wobble my pen down here and create a really light misty haze. And you can just come a little bit higher if you want, but just keep it really, really, really lightly just to add in some extra randomness to the sort of spray. But make sure that the very bottom is nice and colourful. It's nice and bright down here. Now we're going to go ahead and we're going to create 3 different layers for this. You can do it all on the same layer if you're concerned about your layer count. I'm going to create a new layer. Go to my brush. I'm going to change it to elements though and clouds. I'm going to keep the opacity at 41%. The size is set to 15%. And I can just lightly now go over here. And every time you do, you're going to potentially get the odd little high rays of some spray here, which I just think look awesome. Again, you can go a little bit higher if you want to, but down at the bottom here, we want to really show the water's crashing down, creating this real roaring movement. There's lots of movement down here. You can add in a little bit of extra spray, making its way a little bit higher, the odd sort of patch here and there. Don't be afraid to also go in behind these areas of land here. It will just help the separation between all of the stages of this design. Now we're going to go ahead and we'll create a new layer. We'll go to our colors. We'll grab the white in the middle of that fourth column from the right again. And we can probably keep the brush size the same, or we could drop it down. Let's go ahead and let's start off with a few that are the 15% mark. So we're going to keep it nice and subtle, really, really nice and subtle, and more so towards the middle and at the bottom. So you can add in these lovely brighter spots down here, and then as they sort of make their way up and out, and you get this much more dynamic look to it. It's really white down here. You can get a real impression for the spray. If I bring that down to a 6% now, I can maybe raise up a few on the sides here, just into view a tiny bit, and maybe even the odd one slightly higher in the waterfall. You know, that one was a little bit probably too on its own, so I'm just going to redo that. And that one is also a little bit too much of a blob. So you may want to just give it a couple of attempts here and there. Again, this is where sometimes I like to keep my mistakes in the video, because not necessarily mistakes, just my attempts, just so that you can see, you know, we don't nail it first time. So now we've done that area of mist, just temporarily, we're going to leave it for a minute. We're going to collapse our group down. We're going to open up our foreground group. We're going to foreground one. We're going to create a new layer at the top, but we're not going to clip it. We're going to go to our color and grab the top color in the fourth column from the right, and we're going to go to our brush and use airbrushing in the soft brush. And around that 10% mark again, we're just going to lightly go along the bottom edge here, get rid of that, blending it all into the landing behind. And it should then also start to really just fade away and create kind of an eerie effect. And you can bring up the color a little bit on the sides. Over here on the left, we're also going to just blend this out as well. And you want that kind of line to still sit there, because then you end up with that nice separation between the two. But just a little something like this. And then go back to your brush, go back to the option of, we'll go back into elements and clouds. I'm going to keep it on the same layer. I'm going to go to 15% on the brush size this time. I'm just going to build in some of these areas here. You know, you can build on top. You can really try and get rid of certain areas. Don't press too firm in certain areas, mind. But just the odd little sort of nice area of spray will just look fantastic. And just, you know, all the water's just moving around in the air. Now I'm then going to go ahead though, and I'm going to create another new layer. I'm going to go to my color. I'm going to change it to the middle color in that fourth column from the right. We'll set the brush size probably to 6% for a minute, because what we want to do at this particular point is I want to sort of really brighten up this line here. I really want to kind of brighten this up a little bit using the whiter tone a little bit lower down, and just introduce a couple of higher specks here and there using the smaller brush size, but just a little bit more along that water's edge and a little bit something like this. So that way we now have a nice sort of contrast, and we can then bring that glow down a little bit, almost a misty sort of white glow down onto the water when we reflect it. Now at this point you just need to take a look at your design, maybe compress it all the way down, but take a look at it and make sure you're happy with the aesthetic of it. Now I'm going to go ahead and just make a minor change to my waterfall, where we've got the sort of brighter highlights on the top here. I'm going to tap on them for a minute. I'm going to tap on them and mask them so we don't add a new layer. So we're on the mask. My color is set to black, and my brush, I want to set it to airbrushing and the soft brush. And I do want to add in just a light blend out with a 10% here, just blending that out a little bit on the right side. And over here, I also want to kind of blend out a little bit as well, just kind of taking away a little bit of that color and forcing it a little bit higher where the light just tips over. So it's just on the top edges only. And another thing you can do if you want to is if you go ahead and tap on the layer below, for example, create a new layer, go to your color and grab the top color here in the fourth column. Just like we did before, if you go back to your brush and go to painting and the stucco brush, you can go ahead and you can run your brush along some of these areas here, adding in the tiniest amount of pressure, but just adding in some much needed texture in there. So some additional texture. You can really run it over everywhere if you want. It's totally up to you. It will create a lovely rocky surface. So just try and just do it at all sorts of angles. I've seen people in the past potentially just continue in the same motion, and you can see a few of the drag lines. So you can see that how the brush is working, how the texture's been applied. So here, if you kind of just chop away at it at all sorts of angles and dashes and taps almost, you should be able to just take away little areas of lighting here and there, just enough that you can get a little bit of that texture come through. Now, at this point, I'm happy with how it looks, so we're going to go ahead and progress on. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to reflect it in the water below before we then also do these areas here. So we're going to go ahead, and if you're happy with your land here, you can pinch your waterfall together, etc. You can get rid of all those layers where you think is appropriate. The only thing we now need to do is turn off our foreground groups at the top here until you end up with this effect here. I want you to then swipe down with 3 fingers and go to the option of copy all. If we go back to our layers and we go ahead and open up our water, there's an empty layer in there above our block of water. Tap on it and clipping mask it to the water. Then go ahead and swipe down with 3 fingers and paste, and it will paste it on that empty layer. Flip it vertically, drag it down. Now I always like to add in a little bit of freeform and flatten it down. So I'm just going to flatten it down a little bit and then move it up, and you should be able to then create that lovely reflection there. And I'm going to probably bring that in a tiny bit more as well, like so. And you want to just join them up. Now turn on snapping here in the bottom left and you'll get these orange lines which let you know here that you have perfectly moved it down. It touches the left and right and it's in the center of our design. You can tap on your cursor when you're done. If we then go ahead and we go to our foreground and turn them back on, and we take a look at what we've done. So we turned on our foreground groups. We've now got this reflection of the scene above. Now we're going to go ahead and sort that out shortly in terms of adding in all the effects. We need to work on this area here first before we then flip this and also reflect in the water below. So we're going to go ahead and collapse our water group down. We're going to open up our foreground 2 group. We're going to tap on the empty layer here, tap on it and clip it to the land. We'll go to our colors. We're working with this area of color here, so we're going to grab the middle color in the second column, and your brush wants to be set again to turpentine. So we'll go back to turpentine under painting. We'll go ahead and set the brush size to, let's start off with 3% so we can work in some areas of purposeful detail, because I want this little area here to be a rock of some sort, so it's a bit closer to camera, and I'm just going to draw in kind of a silhouette of it almost. I'm just going to draw in like a large area of highlight on that top edge, link them together maybe at the top, just introducing a flatter area of grey, creating a bit of a boulder, kind of separating it, brings it right out close towards us. Let's go ahead then and maybe set the brush size to 8% and chuck in some colour. So we'll chuck in like an area down here towards the water. We could go ahead and bring that back down to 3% and create lots of kind of grey areas, almost like stone that makes its way down in towards the water. So you can create these little areas down here right up against the water's edge. It's just where the stone meets the water. Lovely stuff. And then we'll set the brush back to the option there of 8%. We'll come down that kind of boulder there at the back, which I imagine is there. And then we can also go ahead and just run some lines down here showing how the land moves and flows down towards that water's edge, and putting it in behind that rock by leaving a gap, and just basic blueprint of your design. So a little something like this. Again, very subtle to see on camera. We'll go ahead and we'll create a new layer. We'll tap on it and we'll clipping mask it. We'll go to our colors. Now we do have this additional blue tone here at the bottom, but I'm going to skip over that one. I don't think it's necessary to add that in. So I'm going to jump to the greens now. So the top of the third column there. And we're going to bring that brush into the 5% range. And I want to sort of add in, where that light's coming down and in, I want to add some green onto here. So I'm going to go ahead and add some green onto here. Little patches of green, like I'm kind of flattening the land a little bit. I'm creating like these flat areas of grassy area down here. And then I want to introduce a little bit back here as well. Now we probably will hack into these shortly once we've introduced our tree here that's going to sit just in this gap. You can see I've left this kind of ledge here purposeful so that I can add in some add in a tree there that's got its own space. I'm just flattening the land a little bit, creating streak after streak to also try and create a bit of a kind of green grassy look to the top of here. So a little something like that. I can bring that quite a lot lower down towards the water, and I'll probably maybe bring in a little bit of green here at the back as well. Painting aesthetic, remember, so it doesn't need to be sort of super perfect. We want the streaks of the turpentine here to kind of create that grassy kind of look on there. And we've got a lovely big area of green. We can then go ahead and go to our layers, create another new layer. Tap on it, clipping mask it, change the color to the middle color in that third column. And I think we could probably start with 5%, but we may want to reduce that down. I'm going to bring that in at 5%, and I think we can just sort of brighten up this area. Now, I'm trying to imagine where that sun's coming through. If I bring in a line down here, I'm going to imagine it's going to somewhat land in this area here, the majority. So I don't want to add in too much further down. And I'm probably going to bring that brush size down to 3% so I can be in real control of it. And I'm going to try and just sort of patch in some really light streakiness. Now, the wonderful thing with this turpentine is if you keep your brush stroke going and going and going, you eventually kind of run out of paint. So now I've just got these really faint lines here of grass and highlight. So if I add in some more color here, every time I let go momentarily, I can get more color back. And then as I keep going and keep going and keep going, now I've just lost almost all of my color now. So I now need to go back in up here, add in some brighter tone, and just create the lovely little brighter areas, I imagine, where that sun's going to be beaming in and down, and maybe a tiny little bit there. And feel free to also maybe sort of flick your pen here in like a grassy blade style, almost like a little something like this. You can just create little dashes here and there just to break up the land and create some, you know, less sort of flat plains of grass. You can create some little sort of bladed areas. They'll look quite nice. Feel free to also go ahead and go back to this color here, the top of the third column there. You can do it on this same layer if you want to, it's not a crime. And you can just dash in some more streaks here, but slightly with a darker greener color. So in your highlight areas, you can break them up by just adding in little sort of streaks here and there, just to break up the land. So what I'm looking for is here, for example, we've got these lovely little streaks just making their way up and on top of the yellowy tones. Again, hopefully my camera's not shaking too much for you. I apologize if it is. But we should end up with this lovely little sort of green area on the top. Now I mentioned a tree. Let's go ahead and introduce that. So we'll create a new layer. We're going to keep it unclipped and we're going to go to our colors. We'll grab the top color here in the second column, and your brush wants to be probably something a little bit different. We're going to go ahead and we're going to go to the studio pen under inking. And I'll just show you my settings for stabilization just in case. I've got streamline. I'm going to bring that down a little bit. I'm going to bring that down to around about sort of the 70% mark and bring that stabilization down as well, so I can get a few more jitters in there. And we're going to go ahead and draw in that tree. Now, if you want to, you can go back ahead and turn on your guide. And in the guide, you might just about be able to see it. If we go ahead and actually tap on the guide and invert it, you see this kind of mushroom shape here. That's kind of your guide for scale. So if I go ahead and go back to that empty layer in the foreground group 2, we can then go ahead and create a tree, a nice lovely contorted tree, a little something like this. And maybe we sort of bring it like a little bit sort of curved, and it sort of curving around a little bit like so. That's the main sort of structure here in play. Now I'm trying to keep it just on this top edge here. I don't want to sort of run down too low. So I'm just going to link it at the bottom and drag and drop the color in. Just block it in. And then once we've got the silhouette there of that point, we can then go ahead and create some branches that run off from there. You know, the branches typically will run off and try to sort of balance out the tree. So if you've got a large area here, try and run some off on the opposite side so that you can just sort of balance out the tree. Make sure it's got some support. And I think, again, a wonderful thing with trees a lot of the time is if you can create some lines that run over the top of each other, it shows depth in the tree. It shows that there's branches on the far side of the tree that we can't necessarily see, but they pop out enough so that then they can just run over the top here, and they just create so much more depth and more structure to the tree. I'm going to create a big one running off the top up here. I can let this one get a little bit higher. Now, I wouldn't sort of stress too much of your tree lines because they're going to get somewhat blocked in a moment by all the greenery that's going to sit at the top. What I always say is we do it just in case they are visible. You know, just in case they are visible, they pop out enough in our tree here in the gaps between all the greenery that's going to sit on the top. Now you can see here I'm just bulking out this area here. I don't want it to lean off to the right too much, so I'm just going to bulk that in a little bit more, and I'll run one a little bit higher as well. And you should end up with a lovely sort of contorted shape like this. Then what we can do is we can go ahead and create a new layer. We can go ahead and go to our brush. We'll go back to the option of painting and turpentine. And I'm probably going to set it to 8% to start with. We can just patch in some dark areas here of the foliage. Now, to be honest, 8's probably a little bit too big, so I'm going to drop it in that middle gap there at 5%. and I'm just going to go ahead and just chuck in some clusters of color. And this is again your base color. This is where you can then build the color on top of here. So I'm going to turn off my guide momentarily, and I'm going to go ahead and just bulk in some basic shapes here for my clusters of all the greenery. So you're just creating huge lumps of it. Now, I would recommend bringing that opacity back up to 100%, just so we can really block that in and create these lovely big clusters in here, and maybe a little bit more towards the top. It might be quite hard to see necessarily against the colors in behind. If so, you could go ahead and maybe even turn off the land and etc. in behind if that's something that you need to do. But all you're trying to do at the moment anyway is just create blocks of where you're going to add in your greenery. So a little bit on the back there, and taking a look overall, I think that one could maybe do with being a little bit bigger. I'm going to block that in a tiny bit more. And I think I could even drop the brush size down to 3% potentially and create some smaller areas at the back. Smaller little areas there. They can touch. They don't need to necessarily be clusters that are separated. I tend to separate them to start with and then just eventually end up sort of getting quite brave and bringing them a little closer together. Just so I know the plan. I can see the plan of where I've laid out all of those little clusters of dark color, which I can then build on top of in a moment with some lovely, greens and lovely warm colors coming from the top. So once you've got your silhouette, you can then go ahead and create another new layer. Go to your colors. We can then move into some of those greener tones. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to grab this color here, that green here at the top of the third column. And now we're looking for the little cluster balls. Again, essentially mine is this kind of shape here. Okay, we want to go ahead and make sure that every little cluster, which is like a cluster like here, there's a cluster here and a cluster here. I'm looking to add some color to the top right edges of those. And so when we go ahead and we get in here now, we're going to go ahead and just scribble our pen, scribble it, wiggle it, chuck some color on, and look for your clusters and add it towards those top right edges of your little clusters. Push them a little bit further out if you need to, really chuck the color in. And we're going to add some bright yellow highlights on top in a moment. So let's bring that opacity back down to the 75% mark so we can get some lovely variation in the colors. I'm going to build on top, and I'm going to build and build and build in them greens and add in lovely little patches in there. Build in some more green here. You can hear me maybe dabbing and tapping away on the screen, and I'm going to be really brave and add in like a really large cluster of green up here. It's lovely and large and does sit quite close, and you can see I'm also leaving shadow gaps, and that's essentially again where each little cluster ball you're adding in the green, but you're leaving it on that bottom left hand corner of all the little clusters, and that leaves you with shadows. It leaves your base color, and it leaves your shadows to sit there. And look at the sort of clusters coming together. We'll add in another one back here, and just because they're in the kind of shaded area doesn't mean that they don't get any green. The green is almost acting as my mid-tone, so I'm just sort of dashing in some areas of sort of green back there, adding in enough that I can just work out the tops of that tree, and I'll add in some there on that one at the back. I'm going to definitely make sure that the top edge is nice and bright, and I can even exaggerate the shape even further. I can push the greens even higher outwards, creating tier after tier of detail. And we'll go ahead and create a new layer. We'll go to our colors, and we'll grab the yellow in the middle of the third column there. And now you're looking for your clusters, and you're working out, well, really, the lighting probably only hit these ones here. It's not going to hit those ones towards the back. So now we're going to get in here, going to dash in the detail. And again, same exact technique, so it matches up nicely. And you're looking to add it in the largest areas, even more so now to the top right hand edge of all of your little clusters. So we're looking for all of these little areas that we can just dash in some little bright yellow spots. Maybe that only gets a little bit, just on the sort of taking a look at that and reviewing it and going, okay, maybe that only gets a little bit. I'm going to imagine that this one gets a good amount of color though, but just those top edges there, just enough that they're poking out just enough that they can get some lighting, and maybe you can add in the odd tiny little dash here and there, additional ones in the shadows, but you can definitely add it in on those top edges. You can really kind of bulk out that top line of your little clusters. Just add in this in. Lovely stuff. Lovely bright colors. And again, they kind of match up to below, but you can see how, okay, now I understand when that lighting is going to come through in a minute, it's going to come through, it's just going to hit those top edges only. And then one final time, we'll go ahead and create another new layer. We're going to change the blend mode though from normal to add. At this point, feel free to pinch your 3 layers here for your tree top together if you want to. I'm going to undo it because I'm going to keep mine, but if you need to, you can do. And now I just want you to get in here and just sort of dash in a little bit in certain areas just towards the top, really, 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 really sparingly. Just a few additional dashes here and there to show the ones that are definitely getting that real 100% brightness. So I can probably get in here too and add in a few more on that top edge. And then with the same brush on the same layer, we're just going to come down here now into the grass, and we're going to introduce some little sort of lines in here. Now I'm going to try and keep it within the boundaries though of the actual land, and I could probably bring that brush size down to a 2%, and I could just add in some additional blades of grass that we were doing just beforehand, but in the areas that I think are just now going to definitely get some sunlight. Now I say the areas because if that's coming across, this area in behind is probably going to end up in the shadows now. So if I can probably introduce some here and back here, but probably not in behind it, because in behind in a minute, I'm going to go ahead and have to erase some of that stuff. So we're just adding in some extra little detail there. And now we'll shade behind there. So all we need to do for that is we'll go back down. We're going to have to take a look at our layers one at a time. So we've got our sort of color here at the top. I'm going to go ahead and go to my eraser. Tap on my eraser. I'll use the soft brush under airbrushing. Set the brush size to about 2 or 3%. Imagine where that line's coming across for the lighting. It's going straight across. So let's get rid of this back here and link it to the base trunk of your tree. So just draw in an area where you think is now going to get a little bit darker, and then just go back into each layer, go down a layer again, and get rid. So just creating a bit of a shadow in behind your tree. I can break down some of that as well. I'll probably go back up a layer and just take that down a few over there. And we'll go down again, I think, all the way down to the stone layer at the back, and really give that a good solid shadow there. A nice silhouette of a tree, but with a shadow just running off the back edge of it. And there's only one sort of extra detail really to add in this area. Your tree's done with. You can pinch your tree all together. You can pinch this stonework together for the moment. All you need to do is create a new layer and clip it to your stone. We're going to go ahead and go to our colors. We'll grab this color here in the middle of the far right column. Brush back to turpentine. We're going to zoom in down here. And we're just going to, with a 3% brush size, just on this top edge of this rock, just introduce some little sort of scratchy marks in here, just where a little bit of lighting. Just a little bit of lighting on that rock, just enough. We can pull that out a little bit more. And likewise at the back here, maybe I can introduce like a big, large streak running down here, and maybe even outline it almost at the top to show that light coming in from behind. Just a little bit of extra detail in there. And once you're happy with that land, you can now go ahead and you can collapse it down, and you can now flatten it down if you want to as well. You can tap on the group and flatten it all into one layer. What I'm going to go ahead and do is I'm going to turn off absolutely every single layer other than foreground 2. Absolutely everything. I'm going to swipe down with 3 fingers, copy all. I'm going to go ahead then and bring everything back in. So turn on all your groups again and your background color. Go to your water group, and where you've got the reflection, create another new layer. Tap on it and clipping mask it. We're going to go ahead then and swipe down with 3 fingers to go to the option of paste and flip it vertically and move it down. Now the only thing I always say with the land here necessarily is you kind of just want the points on the end to match up. We're going to add in some effects in a moment that are going to kind of lose a lot of the detail here. So if it doesn't quite sort of match up, mine's got a bit of a sort of drop on the end there. I'm going to go ahead and try to match it up as much as I can, making sure really this left edge here is touching the edge of the canvas. So a little bit like this, and I'll tap on my cursor when I'm done. I'll first of all adjust this. So I'll go ahead and grab my eraser and I'll tap on it, and I'll grab calligraphy and the monoline brush. I'm going to go ahead and go into my foreground 2 group and go down to the basic shape of it all. Bring that brush size to 5%, and I'm just going to kind of flatten this area off. I'm going to point it a little bit upwards. Then I'll go ahead and go into my water group and the reflection, and I'll just get rid of the excess up here. It doesn't matter necessarily that they don't touch. It's perfectly fine to have that. It's just the way that the water is going to reflect. And we're going to add some effects in here anyway for the water. So the first thing I want to go ahead and do is I'm going to tap on this layer. I'm going to change its blend mode from normal. I'm going to change it to the option of soft light. Now immediately you should get this fantastic looking reflection underneath. We're going to go ahead and go to our smudge tool. Tapping on our smudge tool using turpentine and a nice sort of 3 to 2% brush size will look fantastic. We're going to get in here and start smudging. We're going to push that reflection left and right, push in across and smudge away. You can push across and push all the way in. And we're just going to smudge and just keep pushing the reflection around a little bit, breaking down the structure. You can smudge out some of these details here, get rid of the tree a little bit, smudge inwards. So what I mean is like over here, there's nothing. So if I push inwards, I just bring in sort of, I'm kind of pushing and erasing almost through that. I'm going to break this down a little bit too. Lovely stuff. And we should end up with still a little bit of a reflection, just enough color there until we end up with this beautiful reflection like so. And then we need to go down. We need to go down to this layer here for the actual full reflection from above. I'm going to tap on it first of all. I'm going to bring the opacity down. I'm going to bring it down to 80%. And that will just bring through a little bit of blue from the water. And again here, we're just going to smudge away. You want to try and keep it nice and horizontal. Again, apologies if my camera does start to shake, but we're just going to push it across, pushing away some of the details. Now, you don't necessarily have to get rid of absolutely everything. There could be a surface here in the water where, or a ripple where then there's a flat spot just in behind it. So you pushing side to side, just you end up with a gap where there will be a nice perfect little flat spot with your reflection. It doesn't have to always be completely sort of distorted and pushed around too much. Now, one thing to note is here, if you're not getting quite this nice sort of glowy look here, you may need to go ahead and potentially just introduce a bit more grey in your reflection. So on this layer here, potentially just go ahead and grab your brush, go to your color and grab this color here, the top of the fourth column. And if you go ahead and set that to airbrushing and a soft brush, for example, you may just be able to bring in a little bit of grey there, like down here. See how I brought that in and then it makes it blue. I don't want everybody to do that, but if you're not getting a little bit of that glowy color down here, then that's how you can achieve that. So we're then going to go ahead and add in some further effects on the water as well, just to add in some lovely ripples on there. So we're going to go ahead and create a new layer above our land here, tap on it and clipping mask it. We're going to go ahead and add in some dark lines here for your ripples. So we're going to go ahead and we'll grab the top of the second column, brush. I'm going to go to painting, turpentine, 3% brush size, and we're just going to go ahead and just streak in here, streaking in the water. And you don't really want to create massive long lines, so I'm going to undo a few of those. You want to create some nice slim small dashes here and there. They don't need to be full like lines. They can be really, really light with your pressure like I'm doing right now. You can even make that a little bit smaller. I'm going to undo that 3%. I'm going to bring that down to 2. I'm just going to bring in some lovely streaks, go over the top of this reflection, you know, really break down the water, create some lovely streaks in here, breaking that down. And then what I want you to do is when you're around here, around the base of some of this land, if I go to a 3%, I'm just going to run around the base almost. And then along here as well. I just want to darken that up before we add in a lovely highlight in a minute. So I'm just darkening up behind here, trying to get rid of that stark kind of harsh land to water effect. Just darkening up in there, creating some more streaks, more and more streaks. Let's get rid of that. Let's make our brush size 2%, bring that a little bit further back. And then we're going to go ahead and add in some highlights. So we're going to go ahead and we'll go to our layers, we'll create a new layer, tap on it, clipping mask it, change the blend mode from normal to add this time. We'll go to our colors. I'm going to go for the middle color in this column here, the 6th column. We're going to introduce some streaks in here. And again, similar fashion, except now you're just adding in highlights. So you can just streak this through. Less will be more, as I keep saying. But in your reflection of your waterfall, maybe you want to add in some further streaks. Keeping it quite sort of minimal. You don't want to add in too much. And then if we zoom in, we're just going to go ahead and run around the land here. So I want to sort of brighten that up a little bit, especially in behind, because back here it's going to be really bright in a minute. So I'm just going to run some horizontal lines across there too. Show that's where the sort of water's moving the most, is back there, and then it starts to sort of flatten out a little bit as it makes its way forward. You can add in some water ripple lines around here too. You don't have to go all the way around the rock, but just enough to sort of brighten it up, show that the water's maybe crashing up against it a little bit. Just adds in a little extra dimension. And then another layer to create. I'm going to create a new one, tap on it, clipping mask it. Change your color from the one we had before to this one here, the middle of the fourth column from the right. We're going to go ahead and go to our elements brush again. So we're going to go back into the option of elements and the clouds. Set the brush size to 6%. And I'm just going to go ahead and go along here now. So I'm on the water's edge now. And we're just trying to bring that mist down along the top surface of the water. I'm just going left to right a little bit just to try and really brighten up this line here. So you end up with this like bright white line here. Again, just to bring that mist even closer towards us and a little bit lower down in our design. Now the final step is to add in some lighting, as I always do. So we're going to go ahead and go up to the top of our layers. You can collapse your water down if you like and flatten it. I'm going to go right to the top and create 2 new layers, swipe from left to right on both and group them together. I'll rename this and call it lighting. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to tap on the top layer first. I'm going to change the blend mode from normal to add. I'm going to go to my color. I'm going to grab the color in the top right of the palette. And our brush, first of all, wants to be luminance and the flare. And the size for the flare is 34%. Now, you can see it's going to be nice and bright. So we're going to sort of position this here and going to press really lightly, even though it is going to create a really blown out flare. But that's where your sun is. And we want it exactly there. So it's just peeking in behind those hills. I'm going to go ahead and go to the layer. I'm going to move it across. I'm going to tap on it. I'm going to bring its opacity down a little bit. We don't want it too strong to start with. So we're going to bring it to 50%. The layer underneath, we're going to go ahead and change the blend mode from normal to the option of pin light. Going to keep the same color, but we're going to go to our brush this time and go to the option of airbrushing and the soft brush. You're going to want a brush size probably around about 15 to 20%. We're drawing in a line from our sun and we're going to bring that across like so. Look at how that color just breaks in now through the top of our design and peeks into this little valley here that we've created. And you can really create like a focused beam where it just runs through the middle. So you always kind of want to start from where your sun is, right in the middle of your sun, and draw a line outwards. And you can pivot the angle up and down if you wish, just up and down, to create enough space for some lighting to make its way through and into our little space down here. And if we go ahead and we pinch with 2 fingers and we go full screen with 4, we end up with today's finished design. So I hope you enjoyed today's tutorial. As always, make sure to tag me in finished creations over on Instagram. Come and share them with the community over on Discord. It's completely free to join. And if you want even more tutorials from me, you can come and join me over on Patreon, where I've been posting exclusive tutorials every single month to my patrons. And the list now sits at nearly 100 at the time of recording. So make sure to go ahead and check that out using the link in the description down below. And if you like this video, you'll probably like this one here on YouTube as well. So use the cards on screen now to go ahead and check that out. And with all that said, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.